Hi there, Erika Garms here, CEO and founder of WorkingSmarts, an organization development consulting firm with a special, unique angle, and that is simple applied neuroscience. So you're here for the session on building brain-friendly workplaces, and boy, do I have some juicy goodies for you. I'm going to share my screen and start the presentation. Okay, so what I have to share with you today is simple, big ideas in terms of their impact borrowed from neuroscience that really help us address organizational challenges in our workplaces today. This happens to be a specialization area and a passion area of mine. I came from a background originally, earlier in my career, of K-12 education, and I was a classroom teacher. And the way that my teacher training program taught new in-service teachers was using brain-based learning. So when I made the transition from education to business and industry and training and development, learning and development, I lost those simple applied neuroscience concepts that I was so used to using in the classroom and wondered why we couldn't be using those with adults in learning situations. So that's what I've done, is connected those same ideas about how the brain works and how it doesn't work so that we get more productivity, less anxiety, less stress in the workplace. So my driving question has been for about a decade now, how can neuroscience help? What is there that is just ripe for the picking and the translating into workplaces today that could really make things better for us? Because we have some perennial issues that have not gotten substantially better over the decades that we really could use some assistance with. So what I did when I first came up with this suspicion that there were ideas that we could be implanting into workplaces from neuroscience, I started off by doing a bit of research on my own. And what I did was go to the Forbes Best Places to Work list of companies, and I went to a sampling of those companies that appeared year after year. So they were frequent appearers on the list rather than some of the companies that appeared once or twice and then were vanishing. So I went to the top people person in a sampling of these companies, and this was the senior VP of HR, or maybe the organization effectiveness or organization development leader. And I interviewed them and asked two questions, just two questions. The first question was, why are you on the list? What is it about your people practices that puts you on the list over and over again? And then the second question I asked was, despite the fact that you made it onto this list and have done so repeatedly, what do you still struggle with, if anything? And here's the summary of what I heard that was in common across all of the organizations that I spoke with. They said, well, some of the reasons that we are on that list related to our people practices is that we're really attractive to candidates. We have a clear and we have a consistent cultural brand, organizational brand. We focus on a mission that's clear to all. We have a positive financial score card. We have employee involvement and input practices, systems, but what we still struggle with are these things. Basic respect towards each other, up, down, side to side. We struggle with keeping our retention up and our turnover reasonable, with organizational health as well as individual employee health, with sustainable high performance so that people aren't super performers for a short period of time and then burning out, with agility, with curiosity, innovation, and finally, but not least, management and leadership excellence. Those are some of the ongoing challenges that they felt they were dealing with. So I put together a composite profile of what I thought a brain-friendly workplace would look like. And this is an example of a piece of that infographic. So what I determined was that brain-friendly workplaces are those where directness is seen and practiced. There is focus, trust, encouraging connections, growth, development. So what we don't see in brain-friendly workplaces, or rather what we do see in unbrain-friendly workplaces, is drama, frenzy, threat, hyper-competition, sometimes stagnation, so not continuous growth or learning. There's blame, there's covering up. So I changed the name of my consulting firm at that point to WorkingSmarts, because I was going to be using simple applied neuroscience in everything that I did. I wrote the book called The Brain-Friendly Workplace and an accompanying workbook and a video series. And then I went from Duluth, Minnesota to Dubai and the Middle East, sharing what some of these big ideas are from neuroscience that address our organizational challenges. And I have some of those to share with you today. Where that started from has evolved now into a collection and a system of assessments and measuring tools and short and longer form programs delivered either live or online or both, and then some larger integration kinds of projects. And they're all built on the same foundational principles and grounded in the same theory about the way that brains work and don't work and the way that people get along and make decisions and manage change and all that. So the first big idea, folks, is that there's an overarching goal of the brain. And once we understand this, so many other things make so much more sense. So the idea is that for eons now, humans have been driven to minimize all threat for a good reason, right? We needed to stay safe, we needed to stay alive. And the other piece of that drive is that once we felt sufficiently safe, then we were instantaneously driven to maximize reward. And I'm not talking about monetary reward here, I'm talking about a particular group of chemicals bursting or squirting into the brain that make us feel relaxed, happy, pleasant. And so let's go dive a little bit deeper into minimizing threat first of all. So because this response is so innate and so you'll see that it's easy to trigger. And for good reason, again, when we need to keep ourselves safe. Now the response, the physiological response we have to threats today is the same response that we have always had to whatever the threats were at the time. So today's threats are definitely different looking than they were thousands of years ago. But again, the physiological response is the same. When we are threatened or triggered, we are flooded. So what that means is there is a burst of chemicals in our brain, and I like to call that stress soup. And the brain sits in that stress soup almost like a marinade for a good long time until we have sufficiently calmed. Now, unfortunately, it's difficult to calm. That's not easy. It's not automatic. It's something that we can improve upon. We can shorten up the time that it takes us to calm and reset, but it is not automatic. And when that's happening, when you are triggered and you've got your marinade of stress soup, that interferes with our prefrontal cortex in a way that is unfortunate at work, because the prefrontal cortex is the area of the brain that we rely on most to do our work. So it's here. It's behind the forehead. It's not the entire chunk of brain there. It's just a thin layer that lays across the front and top of the brain there. So just underneath your skull. It's very precarious because it's so thin, and that is what separates our abilities from our critter cousins. Once we are triggered, unfortunately, we lose the connection to that prefrontal cortex. We go offline. Well, how long do you think it takes you to reset after you've gone offline, after you've been triggered? Some of you might be thinking, 5 minutes. Or you might be thinking, oh my gosh, a day, a weekend. And I bet a lot of you are thinking, well, it depends. And yes, it does depend. It probably a number of things. It depends on whether that trigger is something that's that we're accustomed to, or whether it's a new trigger. Whether that trigger is small or big and impacts us in a large way or just a small irritating way. It also depends on how we have seen people reset from childhood all the way up to now. How do we see other people reset or not reset when they are triggered? And those are, like it or not, those are models that we notice, we observe, and we internalize. The research says that it can take us up to 21 or 22 hours to completely reset. So for all of that stress soup to subside and the normal levels of hormones and neurotransmitters to regain themselves, to resettle themselves. So it can take that long. And what is key in that is that involves a complete sleep cycle. Interesting? During sleep, a lot of great things happen, kind of like when your computer is running through its defrag processes at night when you're not using it, right? Our brains, much like a computer, are doing their processing as well. And one of the things that it does is it flushes out the stress soup chemicals down and out into the body through the brain stem. So this tells you how important it is to have enough sleep, but have enough of the right kind of sleep too. You need deep enough sleep so that you're going through those REM cycles enough times to be thoroughly rested. So how does threat show up in our workplaces? Wow, so many ways. Some really subtle and small, and others very obvious and overt and almost shocking. So this could be the tone of someone's email that sets us up, or that triggers us. It could be, I'm deep in thought walking down the hall and somebody passes me and says, "Oh, good morning, Erika," and I don't even hear them because I'm so deep in my thoughts. And they create a whole story about the person that I am because I didn't respond to them, which could be completely inaccurate, but based on what they think they noticed in my behavior. So that sort of thing, those misunderstandings and misinterpretations happen, as you know, all the time, all the time. And then there are big ones. So there are layers of the organization that might not walk their talk, right? There might be a vision in the plaque on the wall, but everyone knows that's not really how the culture is. Well, that's an enormous threat right then and there. Anytime there's contradiction, confusion, misalignment, that equates to a red flag in the brain. And that is chronically stressful to us because it results in anxiety at maybe a low level, maybe a moderate level, but anxiety. Okay, so the flip side of threat is reward, as I said earlier. And we want as much of this as we can get once we have assured ourselves that we're reasonably safe, okay? So we are constantly on the lookout for another little jolt of the positive brain chemicals, hormones, and neurotransmitters. And you might know some of these. Some of them are serotonin, that's a well-known one. Dopamine is another well-known one. You can get these feelings, these reward responses from popping a handful of M&Ms, right? It tastes good. It activates the pleasure center. The sugar has effects on us. But you could also feel that reward from knitting, from sitting and looking out the window in a pretty relaxing coffee shop, listening to music, going on a motorcycle ride, jumping out of an airplane with a parachute. Whatever is pleasant and rewarding to you will cause that rush of brain chemicals. So they could come from physical, emotional, or mental stimuli. They can be spontaneous, like when someone tells us a joke and we laugh and we get these bursts of positive chemicals. Or they can be planned, so we know we like doing an activity, so we're going to plan to do that activity on the weekend or at the end of the week because it's been a busy week. It changes our chemistry in our brain and in our body when we feel reward. And to boot, it has protective effects on the brain. So not only does it change the chemistry in the moment for the better, but it has longer lasting protective effects. There are things that we can do in the workplace to increase people's sense of reward. And they are things like these: inclusion, involvement, learning, connection, collaboration, support, and positive feedback. So even my caution to you is to not skimp on some of these, especially the positive feedback and support ideas, just because some people don't seem to need it. They don't seem to care if they get it or not, and they're grown-ups, they're professionals, they shouldn't need this, right? Unfortunately, that's the way that a lot of managers think, because there are a lot of people that won't overtly appreciate or obviously appreciate positive feedback or support. Know that it's serving them, they're benefiting internally, whether or not they act like they care that you're giving it to them. So my bottom line is, give it to them anyway. Okay, another big idea, and this is about managing the part of the brain that we talked about a minute ago, the prefrontal cortex, the PFC, managing it based on understanding a little bit more about it so that we can squeeze the most productivity out of our workdays. Because there are huge performance gains that have to do with managing this piece of the brain really well. And it can yield huge improvements in time management and productivity if we just understand a few basics. So here's one basic. So that little layer, remember it's just the layer, that represents only 3% of our brain's total mass, but it sucks up over 20% of its energy. So it's an energy hog. It's an energy hog whether you're just sitting listening to let's say, a breakout session in a conference, which is why you can feel really drained and all you did was sit, right? And it certainly feels drained at the end of a day where you had a lot of interactions or you've used your brain in many different ways, right? All within the same work day. Now, it runs out of fuel quickly. So I know, because I've studied this and because I wanted to know, I've tracked this. And for myself, I know that my prefrontal cortex typically stores enough food, right, to last me about 2 hours and 15 minutes on a normal day. So that means if I'm eating breakfast at, let's say, 6:30, that by the time some of my meetings come around or presenting a workshop or something, I might already be depleted. And when you're depleted, you get fuzzier, right? Fuzzier headed, less focused, of course, crabby and irritable, much more easily distracted. So that's an easy fix, folks. We just keep handfuls of nuts or a power bar or something that can give us a zap of quick energy frequently during the day. But the thing that goes along with that is water. We are often, as a country, we are often dehydrated. Especially the older we get, the more dehydrated, unfortunately, we tend to become. So we've got to remember to hydrate more often throughout the day, at least every couple of hours, because same impacts occur when we are slightly dehydrated as when we're hungry and out of fuel. We get super distracted, much more easily distracted, crabby, snippy, and we don't think as clearly or as creatively. Okay, this gal is nobly doing what she thinks is uber productive, and that is multitasking. But as you may know, we now know that there is no such thing truly as multitasking. You could walk and you could chew gum at the same time, but those are motor skills. You can't dual process from the same part of your brain doing two separate things at once. It's not possible. So what happens is when you try to do that, and you may have heard this before, your accuracy, the quality of your product or your thinking is far reduced. So we don't need to do that. So the point with this visual, I hope this doesn't look familiar to all of you, but I'm sure that you recognize what it is. The danger here is that we're modeling, we're allowing the expectation to be perpetuated in our organizational culture that we do expect that we can be 2 or 3 places at one time. So as long as we perpetuate that by letting our calendars look like this and letting others have access to see that this is what our calendar looks like, then we're not making a stake in the ground. We're not trying intentionally to shift the culture around what is reasonable and what is manageable to try to focus on. What's happening here? This, folks, is probably a poorly designed meeting. Perhaps some of the people in this room don't truly need to be in the room. They could have been informed or updated after the meeting. They didn't need to have their bodies in the meeting all together at the same time. Possibly, very likely, there's not any food, right? No snacks, no high protein snacks on the table. There probably aren't pitchers of water. Nobody has a drink in their hand. So they might be out of steam, out of fuel. They might be dehydrated. And there's a whole lot we can do to the design of meetings, even the building of meeting agendas, that is brain friendlier than what we're used to. And the example there is most agendas, I think the default way of building an agenda for a regular staff meeting is that we put the updates and the announcements first on the docket, right? And we go around the room, or around the table, and everyone gives their couple of minutes update on the projects that they're working on, the status. And then once we get down to the lower parts of the agenda, we've got the big meaty issues that we need to discuss, maybe draw some conclusion or make a decision about. But by that time, so frequently, we run out of time, right? We run out of time. We have to quickly sort of artificially truncate the meeting and don't properly wrap it up and determine what the action steps are. Maybe somebody recorded what we were doing. Maybe there were no notes. So we lose a lot of productivity by just putting the meatier things at the end where there's the risk of getting cut off because of time. The other thing that we can do to ameliorate that is just flip that order so that you put the big, tough issues up front when people are probably the freshest, right, and the best fueled. Work your way down to the easier, lighter things that don't need as much cerebral attention for, like the updates and announcements. Or do you even need to be in person to hear those updates and announcements? Could you make a quick video message and pass it around? Or do you have a shared file where you all could enter in your updates and announcements, and then everybody goes to read it at a certain day or time? One comment about focus, and that is that focus is not either on or off. And so often I think we beat ourselves up because we may have been focused and on a task for a while, and then somehow our focus fades, and then we say that we are unfocused. We lost our focus, as if it's just gone. We have 0% focus. Well, what we know now is it's not like a light switch on or off. There's a continuum between a flow state where you are so in the groove, you're in the zone, you become unaware of the people and your surroundings. You might not even hear them if they call your name, and we like being in that mode typically because it feels satisfying and we get something out of it, we produce. At the other end of the continuum is the drift state, and this is like when you're taking a shower, the sort of free-flowing thoughts that come, the connections, the insights, or you might be on a long car drive or sitting on an airplane. So it's when you're not directly focused on a thing, you're not trying to accomplish a task, but things just have a way of coming to you. So in addition to drift and flow from loose to tight focus, there are all these places along that continuum. And guess what? They're all good. We don't need to punish ourselves for sliding around that continuum. They all serve a purpose, and there is some benefit to being there. In fact, our brains will moderate themselves. So if we've been in focus, in flow, towards that end of the spectrum for a while, we can't maintain that state for too long because it's intensive, it's energy intensive and draining. So we will naturally come out of that flow state when we need to move somewhere else along the continuum, and that is okay. If you are interested in knowing a 4-step process for drawing in your focus when you need to tighten it, please send me a quick email and just say, I want the 4 steps for focus, please. And I'd be happy to send you this visual along with a description of what it is that you do in each of those steps when you need to focus in your attention. So what would be different if your people understood brain hygiene? We just went through a few simple ideas, but they have the potential of gaining back 20, 23, 24% of your lost time at work in increased focus and control over your focus. Lastly, there is a new model that is being used in place of this. Remember this? Maslow's hierarchy of needs. This was developed in the 50s. We used it to build off of in many aspects of our society, and it's served us well. And it was developed in the 50s, so Maslow did not have access to fMRI scans and the neuroscience research that we now have access to. So this picture model does take into consideration the new research that we're getting from neuroscience labs. I also have a quick guide that describes each of these 5 universal needs, what they look like, and what happens when it's not met or when that need is threatened for us. This is a fantastic way to move away from personality conflicts, communication style rubs, any of the drama that involves the way people behave. I'm doing this because that's surface level behavior. And if we just try to address that behavior at this level, we're not going to get to the root of it. And these needs are at the root of it. Behavior is not random. It is driven by needs that need to be met. So when we know what these needs are, we better understand people's behavior and we don't take it as personally. We can be more objective about it. Each of us has a different looking profile based on our strengths and areas that we care more about. There is a picture assessment, an online short assessment that can be taken, and it gives you a profile that looks like that. So that once you're focused on the needs, as I said, communications issues and personality conflicts really can fall away largely. And to close, I'll just make a couple of comments about brain-friendly change. Now, unfortunately, given the methods that we have been using for organizational change management, more than 2/3 of all those efforts fail to meet their intended goals, and that has stayed at that 2/3 level for decade after decade after decade. So now we have access to some brain scan information and research about how our brains respond to change. We can do things a little differently. For instance, it is not, folks, it is not the moment that the person on the left's knees release from the bar that is the most stressing. That's not the highest anxiety point, highest fear, highest apprehension. It is this point right here between the hands. So in organizations, we shouldn't be directing our resources and energies and attention towards helping people unleash or let go of the old, because that's not what is the most distressing. We should address our resources and our activities around change to the point where they know what the new state is and they're just not quite there yet. Okay? It's not really change that we're contending with anymore. In fact, it's continuous. It doesn't stop and start. It's just ongoing. The change efforts overlap. They're accelerated, and we're just in a constant state of transition. So the last thing I'll say about change is that many change models have us starting off. Step one is create a sense of concern, right? Alarm people, basically. And some of us call it the burning platform. Create a burning platform so people will pay attention, notice, get that this is serious. But now that you know what you know, do you see a problem with this? As soon as we start a change effort by alarming people, they go offline. They can't hear what's coming next and what's in it for them. So it's really critical that we choose our messaging, our wording carefully so that we give rationale, but we don't shut them down instantaneously. Instead of externalizing change and talking about it as something separate from us, we should be considering living gracefully with transition all the time. That is our new normal, and that's the way that managers and leaders ought to be talking about it so that it doesn't seem like the enemy. Okay? What was smart with that approach, the burning platform approach, was that it got people's attention. We focused on it quickly. But the problem, again, is that we go offline and we are alarmed as soon, and we're fearful for our safety as soon as we are shown the burning platform. So in brain-friendly workplaces, then, you've seen a few of these big ideas. Employees at all levels feel calm, confident, and able to do what they're good at. So that on Sunday nights before the work week starts, this is how we're feeling. Not dreading starting the week. If you have questions or you want to follow up with requests for any of the materials or images that you saw, please shoot me an email. I'm at Erika@WorkingSmarts.com or go to the website, WorkingSmarts.com. Thank you so much.